Hey, welcome back to ZK MasterTech. Today we have a 9630. The customer was complaining that there was an oil leak out of the right front axle. So we brought the tractor into the shop and we're going to check the axle in play. But first we got to take the outer duals off and slide the inner duals out, and then we can get a dial indicator on the axle shaft. Let's check it out. All right, so here we're on the right front part of the axle and we're checking axle in play with a dial indicator. So what you want to do is stick a dial indicator within 2 millimeters of this chamfer on the start of the axle here coming out of the seal. And then we're going to raise and lower the tractor and see how much this axle moves up and down. And it should be between 0 and 7 thousandths, but I got a feeling it's going to be a lot. Let's check it out. Uh-oh. You could see that with your naked eye. There's all the way up, we're zeroed. Oh my. So that just confirms we have a bad axle bearing. Okay, so we know we're going to be removing this front axle here, and you can see how much that's been leaking and getting all over the wheel and slinging it up over onto the windshield. So I'm going to go ahead and drain this axle on these 3 plugs right here, and we're mainly going to be looking for metal and stuff on this side. Hopefully it's not too bad, but we're going to go ahead and get this drained and see what we find. That's not good. This is just what I wiped off from the plug. It's like a bunch of bearing material. All right, this pan was pretty clean before I dumped that axle, and you can just see all the metal that came out of this thing. That's a lot of metal poopies. Not good. Now we're gonna go ahead and get to all the other plugs drained and see what comes out of them. Well, plug number 1 wasn't so good. Let's check on plug number 2. We're gonna drain the center section of the axle here with this one. Okay, so the center plug on the center of the axle and the left-hand final were fairly clean. So we know that it's mostly on the right-hand side, and we're gonna go ahead and get this axle removed. I went ahead and I fully deleted the wheels here. So all we gotta do is disconnect all the wiring and the hoses and the drive shaft off the axle, and then we'll drop it down onto the stand. All right, so under here, we're gonna take these hoses off, and there's some wiring going to the solenoids up there. We're gonna get this drive shaft disconnected, and then I'm gonna use 2 forklifts and chains hooked to the axle, and we're gonna lower this thing down on a stand. Okay, so we got forklifts rigged up on both sides with chains, and we're gonna take these bolts out here. There's 6 on each side, and then we're gonna lower the forklifts down and lower this axle onto this stand right here, and then we'll be able to scooch out the axle out the side. I'm gonna break these bolts loose. Okay, so we got the axle installed in a stand here, and we're gonna go ahead and pull this first stage carrier and everything out of this final drive so we can get it on the bench, take it apart, and take a good look at everything. All right, so we got the ring gear out, the second stage carrier and the first stage carrier. And when you look down in here, you can see how much metal we got inside here. So we're gonna go ahead and get this housing pressed up off of this axle shaft. Okay, so we got that housing off. Let's take a look at this bearing. Uh-oh. Perfect. This one doesn't look terrible. But of course it's gonna get replaced anyway while we're here. So I've looked over all the parts, and doesn't seem like there's any other damage on the gears. It's just this one bearing that came apart. I mean, but it's nasty. So we're just gonna order some bearings and seals and bolts and put this thing back together. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is we gotta remove this bearing race out of here. And these things are usually stuck in here pretty hard. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna weld a bead on the inside of this race. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna shrink the race to where I can put a driver on here and punch it out this other side. And then when we go back together, I got the races in the freezer right now, and when we put them in the freezer, it shrinks it, and then we'll be able to drive it in a lot easier. You gotta use thermodynamics, boys. Yeah. Just like that.
Yucky.
There it is. Now you don't have to weld a perfect bead. The main purpose is putting the heat into this race on the inside. And you can see how easily that drove out of there. Now if you don't heat it, you're gonna beat and beat and beat and never get that thing to move. But just welding a bead in there just releases that enough and shrinks it so it'll come out. All right, there's the second one. And it came right out as well. All right, we got that guy cleaned up and we're waiting on our races to get fully frozen. We're gonna go ahead and pull this shaft out of the stand so we can get a puller on this bearing. And Deere calls for a special eyelet, and we didn't have it, so sometimes you just gotta improvise and weld a lock collar to the bolt. And I already got a new bolt, so I got a new special tool. Now we got the bearing puller 9000 on here. We're gonna try to yank this bearing off the shaft. Okay, so we just stalled the 20-ton jack out on this bearing. So we're gonna cut this cage off and get it off out of the way, and then we're gonna lightly heat on this inner race and put some pressure on it to try to get it off this shaft. Making a mess. Well, we got it off, but man, was it a fight. We ended up having to get a torch on both sides and run 2 torches because the heat dissipation was just, heating one side. By the time you got around the other side, this side was already cooled, below 300 degrees on that race. So we had to get 2 torch tanks going, and of course one of the settling tanks was empty and we had to change that. So eventually we got 2 torches on it and heated it up enough to where that finally break free, but man, did it come off hard. Okay, got a frozen race. So we got our bearing cooker here, aka turkey roaster, and we're heating up engine oil in here. It smells lovely.
Lovely.
And we're about 285, 290, somewhere in there. So we're gonna dunk our parts in here. We got a spacer and a bearing. Spacer goes on first and then the bearing, and this is what the seal goes around. Okay. Splash. Sure, get a good grip on this. Alright, we're gonna let those cook for a while. Tap it. Hammer, 2 hammers. It's not even close to going down.
Not soaking long enough?
Thank you.
Or did I just get it caught?
I don't like it.
I don't blame you. Master? Novice.
Boy, I tell you what, folks, I have never had a spacer go on that hard. We did several attempts of, heating it to 300 and then slipping it on, and it would just get stuck right here, right at the top lip. We emery clothed it many times. I even took a micrometer and checked the outside diameter. It's supposed to be 4.755 to 757. And it was pretty much right on the money. 755, 756 would go over it. So I knew the shaft diameter was in spec. So what I ended up doing was I found the seal driver and it actually fits this spacer ring. And I just went ahead and took this spacer to 350 degrees and slipped it on. And then I put that seal driver on there and just started hammering. I noticed it was going down, so I just went to town on that bad boy and finally got it to seat. But as hard as that went on, I'm real nervous about heating the bearing. You know, I'm gonna probably heat the bearing to 350. I just don't want to go over 400 or turn the bearing blue. But we're gonna take this shaft outside, and it's about 32 degrees outside, so we're gonna let this shaft cool down because the shaft's about 70 degrees in here in the shop. So we're gonna use everything to our advantage possible, because I don't really have a way to pound this bearing on the shaft, and I don't want to beat it on like I had to that spacer. So we're going to get this shaft down to 30 some degrees, and then we're going to put the bearing in the cooker and we're going to get it to 360. And I'm going to put this close to the walkout door so we can just pull that thing outside and then slip the bearing on, and hopefully it'll go down and seat against that spacer. Let's see. Well, we got the shaft down to 52, 45, okay. 39, 40. It's about 40, 45, something like that. What's our bearing at?
Hot.
Hot. 350. All right, you ready?
Yep. Right out of my
Way to go.
Sorry.
Let me see that small. I think it's there.
Oh, much easier.
Went right on. Slick.
Electric hand on it.
Cool. I win. Okay, now that we got that bearing on, we got it set back in the stand, and now we're going to set this housing down on top of this bearing and get it seated on there.
Tap it.
I think it's there. Wasn't so bad. Alright, inside bearing went on easy. So we got that bearing seated, and we put a new thrust washer in here. Now we're going to set the first stage carrier into place. All right, bring her down. Slow. Good. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. Yeah. This is splining onto the axle shaft. Keep going down. Now, normally there's shim pack that goes in here. We're going to put this retainer in and a new bolt. And we're going to torque this down to 200. And then we're going to rotate this housing 3 times. And then what's that going to do is it's going to seat the bearings all the way. And then we'll pull this out, and then we're going to put some lead balls in here, and then we're going to torque them down to 200 and crush them. And then we're going to get first we'll have a baseline torque, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. Torque this bolt to 200. Here's 200. Stay. Rotate this around. Over that one. So I got the dial indicator on the end of the shaft, and we're going to pick this housing up and we're going to see if it moves any. Oh yeah, moves quite a bit. So we need to go tighter on that bolt. There's 300. Still about 10 thousandths. Taking it to 400. You little bugger. Guess we're just gonna go ahead and take it to 600. There's 600. It's 532. Close, 589. There's 6. So I went ahead and I took that bolt to 600, but what I realized was this tool here was flexing a little bit when we were picking up on it. So I just went straight to the axle housing, down to the bolt that goes in the shaft, and now it has no movement at all. When it just picks the whole assembly up, the gauge doesn't move. So now I know those bearings are seated and we have no inplay.
Forgot we're taking it off.
Go. It's gonna be simple. I'm gonna spin it to seat, make sure the bearings are seated. Gotta go 12 times in both directions. Now we're gonna go to 0 torque. Okay, so we back that bolt off and then it's at 0 torque, and we want to make sure that the housing doesn't have any preload on the bearings, which it's pretty loose. So now what we're going to do is get a baseline of how much force it takes to rotate that, and that's what we call rolling drag. So we're getting a baseline for our rolling drag. Now I'm just going to use a snap-on 3/8 tech angle, and it shouldn't exceed 16 foot-pounds. And we want to just keep a constant pressure on it. Read what it is. I would say it's 9 to 10 foot-pounds. We'll just make it easy, we'll say 10. Okay, stop. Okay, so I took that bolt out in this retainer, and I went ahead and I put the thick washer in because we know we're going to need that in the shim pack. And I put the lead balls in grease on here, and putting that extra washer in there is going to allow us to get a good crush on those lead balls. So what we're going to do is put the retainer and that bolt back in, and we're going to torque it down until we reach 18 foot-pounds over our baseline torque, which our baseline rolling drag was 10 foot-pounds. So we're looking for somewhere around 28 foot-pounds rolling drag, and then we'll call it a day. And then we'll pull these lead balls back out, and then we're going to measure the thickness of those lead balls, and that's going to give us the spec for our shim pack. Take this dowel out. Take that. This bolt back in. Okay. Torque this to 200. Now we're going to go to 200. Oh yay, now we got to rotate the housing 12 times in both directions. going to check our rolling drag again. Let's say we're at 18.5. So you want to keep it moving at a slow rate because it takes a little bit more torque to get it started moving. So you want to measure it while it's moving about this speed. So I'd say it's about 18.5. So we're supposed to be 12 to 18 above our baseline. So we're shooting it from 22 to 28. I'm going to be happy when it's 25 to 28. So we're going to go up another 50 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque that bolt to 250. 250. Check her again. I think that might be it. I need to turn up the torque wrench a little bit. Put her to 30. So that's about 25. It's pretty close. It's going anywhere from 22 to 26. Let's get a good roll on it. So I would say right there is 25. I think if we went another 50, it'd probably be too much. Okay, so we took the bolt out and took this retainer out, and there's our lead balls. You can see that they're smashed, so we're going to get those out and measure them with a micrometer and take the average of the two, and that is going to be the thickness of our shim pack. So the thickness of the washer was 62 thousandths, and each one of our balls were 137 thousandths of an inch. So that is going to give us a total of 0.199. So now we got to figure out the shim pack. Okay, so we got our shim pack figured out. We individually measure each shim and then add them all up, and we got exactly 0.199. So I put a dowel in here. Just going to install these shims over this dowel into place. Put our retainer in. Pull it out. Install the bolt. All right, now we got to torque this bad boy to 670 foot-pounds. Now we got a 1-inch torque wrench here. We got to rotate it again. 24, 25, which we're supposed to be between 22 and 28. I'd say 24 is the average. So that's good. Okay, so we got her torqued to 670 and put this plate in there, and it needed to turn just a little bit more to get it to line up into these grooves. So just had to turn it just a little bit more tighter to get that lock plate in there.
One second, I gotta step up.
Just let go. Let go. Bam. There you have it. Okay, so now we're ready to put this final on to the axle, and I made a couple guide pins to thread in there to help with installation.
bolts. Grab that mid torque right next to you, Patrick, and zippy.
So she's in there. I like to put my gun on auto and it'll just run them down and stop. Then we can go through and torque them all to spec. So now we got to torque each one of these bolts 170 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. So in a crisscross pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and torque all of them to 170, and then we're going to put one mark on the bolt, and then we're going to change the torque wrench to 90 degrees, and this will measure degrees of rotation, and then we'll put a second mark once it hits 90. Okay, so we got the seal in on this side, so this funnel is done. We picked up the axle, scooched her over a little bit, and we went ahead and just yanked this side off. And the customer decided while we had the axle out, he wanted to recondition both sides, replace the bearings and seals while we had the axle off, because he's planning on keeping this thing for a while. So he just wanted to do it all at once to make sure this whole thing was good. So we've got the axle moved around back here again, and we're literally going to repeat the same procedure that we just did. So I'm not going to film this whole procedure because it's literally going to be the same thing minus the metal and the bad bearings in the housing. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing reconditioned. So I got the other side done, and these bearings and spacer were even tighter on this one. I had the axle shaft outside, and I actually got this shaft down to 30 degrees, and I heated that spacer up to 350, and it barely went on. I mean, I had to drive it hard all the way down, and I had to kind of tap the bearing a little bit to get it to seat. But we got it all set, got the roll and drag set on it, got all the bolts torqued to 170 plus 90 degrees, got a new seal in. So this axle is ready to install. So we just got to pick it up and spin it around and get it underneath the tractor and lift it up with 2 forklifts and bolt it into place. All right, well, there you go, she's in. So now all we got left to do is, torque these bolts down. I got to hook up the U-joint on the drive shaft. Got a few hoses and some electrical connections to hook up, and then all we got to do is slide the tires on and drive this thing out of the shop. All right, that's going to do it for this video. I appreciate it if you guys hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and keep that green iron moving, guys.